Our ultimate goal is that our designation holders will be able to provide material and presentations to seniors across Canada. We're preparing that material now. Just a few housekeeping issues. First of all of you are on mute, so you won't be able to speak. If you do wish to raise your hand or have a question, please look at the bottom of the screen, the Q&A. We'll be able to answer your questions. I'll answer the questions on the side, or at the end of the session. We've given a little bit of time for questions. I'll answer your questions there with Rianne. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Rianne Rideout. She is currently the Director of Provincial Partnerships and Outreach at Elder Abuse Prevention Ontario. She's responsible for implementing Ontario's strategy to combat elder abuse. For the past 16 years, she's served on the Central East Regional Elder Abuse Council as a consultant, and she's also a teacher, teaching in the area of elder abuse and prevention at Trent University. She's co-authored a number of articles, and she's focused on financial abuse with practical cases and examples. So today, we're going to be looking at practical cases and examples so that you have something to go with. We'll be inviting questions at the end. So over to you, Rihanna.
Thank you, Marie. So today we are going to be talking about preventing financial abuse of older adults. We have a number of situations that we're going to kind of discuss. We'll start the presentation by reviewing what financial abuse is, look at the extent of abuse in Canada, what are the risk factors that create the vulnerability to financial abuse. We'll discuss warning signs of financial abuse, including the misuse of powers of attorney, which we see very often. We'll discuss briefly what the roles and responsibility of a designated POA is for property. And then we'll get into some strategies around questions that you can ask, prevention measures to deal with financial abuse, talk a little bit around some of the legislation and how we can empower seniors to prevent financial abuse in their own lives. So just quickly, as Marie indicated, our organization that I'm from is with Elder Abuse Prevention Ontario. We were funded through the Ministry of Seniors and Accessibility and mandated to implement Ontario's strategy to combat elder abuse. With that, we have three priorities that we strive to achieve, which is coordinating community services. We do training and also public awareness. Many of you may have been involved with World Elder Abuse Awareness Day initiatives across your jurisdictions. And we play a key role in doing that education outreach, not only to our community partners, but also to educate them what their rights are. So today we want to look at what the skills are in terms of recognizing abuse. As advisors, you are in a unique position to identify some of those situations where you may come across signs of undue influence, diminished capacity changing with a client, recognizing some of those warning signs that you can sort of keep as that sort of red flag in your mind when you are speaking with clients and or their family members who may be getting involved as powers of attorney to pay attention to as we go through. The other point that we want to make is that we are living in an aging society, and it shouldn't be any news to people that we are our population is aging quickly, and we need to prepare for the needs of our older adults. So by the time the baby boomers, the younger baby boomers reach age 65, in just over a decade, 1 in 4 persons in Canada will be over the age of 65. So we need to pay attention to what those signs are and the potential for changes. We know that older adults are not a homogeneous group and that we can't treat everyone the same, and we have to look at each individual person's need. And as advisors, as clients live longer, there's going to be a greater need for financial advice as people are aging, and to be more attuned to sometimes their changes as they age. So a client that you've known maybe in their 60s and now is 70s, there may be a lot of changes that have happened to that individual's lives that you need to be paying attention to as their financial advisor and as their financial needs changed over that period of time. So when we're talking about elder abuse, we refer to the World Health Organization's definition, which is a single or repeated act or lack of appropriate action occurring within a relationship of trust which causes harm to that older person. So the key words there that we pay attention to is that relationship of trust, and that there's harm or distress caused to that individual. So that relationship of trust could come from individuals within that person's social circles. It could be a person that's close to them. When we talk about abuse, we also have to pay attention to not only financial abuse, but also emotional, physical, sexual, and neglect. So we aren't going to go through all those forms of abuse. You can refer to those in the prior webinar that we did. But it's important to think about psychological, emotional abuse, because it usually is tied to all forms of abuse, particularly financial abuse. People have a significant impact in either depression or anxiety. There's a lot of feelings that go with feeling being distressed when someone's money may be being mismanaged. So with the extent of the problem, in Canada, we know that over 766,000 older adults experience abuse, and that was done by a study from the National Initiative for the Care of the Elderly, led by Lynn McDonald. And in across the world, there's 1 in 6 older adults over the age of 60 that are experiencing some form of abuse in the community. So both of these studies are more community. They don't include those living in long-term care or retirement homes. So that's really important because we know the extent of the problem could be much larger. So when we look at prevalence of the study that was done in Canada, you'll see that psychological abuse was rated number 1, but fairly right after that is financial abuse. So 2.6%. And those are only those who reported in this incident. It's very difficult sometimes to collect this data across Canada. So again, if you're thinking about your client base and how many older adults you have, paying attention that this is an ongoing issue that we need to be on top of. And when we look at what we're thinking of our definition of financial abuse, really it's someone who's not managing a person's money correctly. It's informed consent. They're not providing consent for someone to use their money. There's a personal gain or monetary personal loss to the older adult that results in this financial abuse that's happening. We know that financial abuse is a crime of the 21st century. So 75% of the consumer's wealth is held by those age 50 plus. And we are in the middle of the largest intergenerational transfer of wealth in the history of Canada. We know that older adults, maybe because of that population increase, more older adults are living longer, some requiring more healthcare needs, their diminished capacity may be happening. We need to pay attention to that increase of the dynamics that are changing. And the stigma and shame around being a victim or fear of loss of freedom is seen as unfit to manage their own finances, is a big reason why few people report. There's some people this may not come to your attention. They may be as clients asking for withdrawals of their investments, but they may not be telling you why because of that embarrassment. We also know that seniors are also victims of investment frauds. We hear about that in the news on a regular basis, and those are usually from people who aren't legitimate advisors, but people get scammed into those situations and they lose sometimes their life savings as a result of that. So, the age group that holds the most wealth can also be vulnerable to that cognitive changes as one ages. And we'll go into a little bit more around the cognitive abilities and how they change, not for everyone, but just to give some overview. And as I mentioned, elder abuse does occur in institutional communities, although some of those studies didn't refer to that. But we do know that seniors living in care homes, retirement homes, also experience financial abuse, particularly when they're not able to manage their funds and relying on that person as a power of attorney, for instance. We see situations arising. More commonly, it's family members that are taking advantage of the older person, as well as people residing in community that are maybe tradespersons or in the private sector that are providing services that take advantage of that position of trust and convince a person to either give them money or they abuse that position of power in their in their acquaintance with the older person. So 2/3 of abuse is committed by family members or trusted individuals, as I just mentioned. So family members are pretty much number one, I would say, and the ones that we get reports of very often. But we also know it can happen with caregivers. So that could be a neighbor, a friend, a paid caregiver, the attorney, healthcare providers, and sometimes we do get reports, or we've seen in news where it could be other banks or financial institutions. And often the older person, you know, they're getting pressure. They don't, they may want to live one way, but they're getting pressure from the family to act different or move somewhere, sell their house. And sometimes they don't know how to cope with that pressure and those dynamics around the family around them. So the key components of financial abuse are, we see as greed. So often the person is in a position where they may be unemployed, maybe suffering some substance misuses, and they see an opportunity where they just feel the money's going to be theirs one day. That false sense of entitlement, like I deserve it. You know, dad earned the money for me. I'm going to inherit it anyway. So why don't you want to see me enjoy it now while you can? And there's also that opportunity for access to funds. So again, being that power of attorney or having joint bank accounts, you know, the person may have cognitive impairment and they'll say, well, the person's not going to miss it anyway. How will they ever know it's gone missing? Who's going to be checking in on me? Particularly if there's only one family member that the older person has in their life, then no one else is doing that check and balance on the person's financial well-being. So when we think of other risk factors for elder abuse, we have to think about your clients and their living situations. Are they living isolated? Are they alone? What is their family dynamics? Do they have one child? Do they have 6 children? Is there multiple powers of attorney? Are they acting jointly or severally? That makes a big difference. Is the person living with a relative? And we know some circumstances where the older adult may be living with a family member or vice versa because of the dependency, the younger family members. And when I say younger, we're talking someone who maybe their 50s or 60s moves back in with the older adult client. So circumstances change over time. They may be more trusting than the younger generation is. They're willing to help out. They were brought up in a society where they're feeling that trust, and they feel if they give a loan, you know, they may not ask for a written documentation of an agreement to pay it back. So they just trust on someone's word that they'll be good to, you know, give it back when they say they're going to. And because of that extra friendliness and the way their personalities, and they're 4 times more likely to experience financial loss than those who may be more, you know, skeptical or asking more questions or maybe not as generous in terms of just giving that money without asking with more, you know, concrete payback. And some people don't have that ability to even have money to provide to individuals or family members when they ask. And it doesn't matter about someone's wealth, that even those living just getting by with basic pensions from government and maybe a pension, they may not have the extreme wealth, but they still may be willing to provide support or financial support to those that they care for. They're also way to look at their risks of financial knowledge and any changes that you may see around that. Is there slower completing financial tasks that they are trying to manage? Is there difficulty assessing the risk in managing their money or money-making opportunities? Being financially sophisticated, they may feel that they are or overconfident in their ability to do that, and you may know otherwise, and that may change as cognition may be affected as a person ages, or they're feeling more pressures or lifestyles change, that maybe they've gone to hospital, or just in general, the person has none of those issues and they just feel very overconfident. So by that, they may be taking bigger risks than you would recommend to that individual. So sometimes that is a risk factor because they may lose a significant amount of wealth that they've earned over the years fairly quickly. So I'm just going to go over some basic issues around capacity because I think that is a challenge that many advisors are maybe coming across. I know that we and those outside of the financial institutions and financial advisors also come across as well. So when we think about capacity, the two big things that you need to think about is the client, do they understand the relevant information that you're speaking to them about? Do they understand and appreciate any of the consequences that may result of their decision? So presenting them with a decision about a trade, do they understand maybe the risks of investing in something very, very high? Do they understand that there could be a significant loss related to that? And what could happen as a result after that, that they may have to sell property, they may not be able to go on their trips. They, you know, the result of a bad or maybe a high risk situation, they need to, can they understand that? And capacity fluctuates. It goes, there's not, it's not a, the law kind of looks at this as a black and white concept, but we know that capacity fluctuates. That in practice, we know there's lots of shades of gray, that it's not just one or the other. And this could be due to a number of reasons. Could be affected by medication, diabetes, sugar levels, where people have a bad day. Maybe they're maybe more aware in morning versus the nighttime. So there's a lot of issues to pay attention to, particularly when you're speaking with your clients. You know, when is the best time? Asking them, when is the best time that we can talk? Is it afternoon or is it morning? Asking them as opposed to sort of trying to fit it within your schedule, because they may be at their best time. You need to ask them when their best time would be. We also have to recognize what the loss of capacity is with aging. Anyone at any age can lose capacity. So we could all be vulnerable to an accident, or that may put us in a situation where we can't make our own financial decisions. But we know with aging, other issues of illness or age-related health problems can create a greater risk of losing capacity. So an example of that could happen suddenly or gradually, such as dementia, which we know has a slower progression. But something very quick onset could be such a situation such as a stroke, where the person now may be in hospital, maybe not be able to speak. Maybe a person also has impaired mobility, that they aren't able to make their decisions, has to rely on other individuals. So these things are important when we think about our someone's capacity and the loss of capacity, and having those conversations with clients early on in their conversations with them is really important. The loss of capacity gives that conversation will give you the ability to, what were their instructions that they wanted and how did they want to plan for that? And we'll talk a little bit about that in the future, in the presentation. But the other thing around capacity is that we also know that those living with dementia is a significant disability in Canada for those over 65. 20% of older adults over the age of 80 have some form of dementia, and those over 90, about 40%. And we're hearing more early onset of dementia situations that are rising as well. So individuals in their late 50s, early 60s who are experiencing early onset of dementia, in terms of planning ahead, we need to assume what could happen. The other thing around incapacity is our own values and beliefs around aging. Sometimes we think about older adults, we kind of make this ageist assumption that all older people don't have the capacity to make their financial decisions. And we see this with families quite often, that, you know, mom or dad has reached this particular age and, you know, they're no longer able to manage their money, that they shouldn't have to worry about that, oh, look after that because they can't. Well, maybe in fact they actually can. It's just their attitudes thinking that because a person has maybe had quite a fall, that they are already making assumptions about inabilities. And that can create a lot of problems when people they start taking decision-making or power away from that individual because they don't think that they're capable of making decisions on their own. So things to be aware of in your firms and in your workplace with your clients, be it when you're thinking about capacity, when you're asking them questions or in their office or you're speaking with them on the phone, do they seem confused? Are they disoriented or do they feel anxious? Is there mood changes? Are they depressed? Are they talking about things that they may not be current? Maybe talk about things that happened a long time ago or they can't recognize. Seasons, day of the week, the year, seasons. When people do capacity assessments, they quite often ask basic general questions such as the date, time, year, and surprisingly, some individuals aren't able to identify that. And maybe there's a pattern of changing or missing appointments, I should say, or forgetting appointments. That happens once in a while, but when it comes to pattern, then that's something that we need to pay attention to. There could also be their inability to manage problems for finances, unfamiliar with basic financial terms. And I think often we use jargon or short forms that we are used to in our everyday practice, but for older adults, they may not, they maybe have understanding of that previously, but now they don't understand what you're talking about. There are difficulty completing forms that you've asked them to sign in your office. Maybe they aren't really understanding, appreciate what assets and values or asset value of their property that they have. So asking those questions back to them can often help. And maybe they're making radical trades that are really out of context to their prior history and what their financial objectives have been over the years. If this doesn't make sense to what they've normal pattern of trades and investments that they've had with you in the past. And you've probably heard this term quite often, the vulnerable investor, and the FAIR project had done a really extensive overview of the financial investors protection, looking at what we have in our legislation, and gave recommendations about how we can improve the system for advisors, as well as protect the older adults who may have capacity or provide incoherent instructions to advisors. And we'll talk a little bit about that and around the safe harbor, but I would encourage you, if you haven't seen that document, to read it. And lastly, just around capacity, around balancing that, balancing the choices and decisions of the individual that is maybe coming or presenting to you, that you might not be sure if it's in that sort of gray zone of capacity. And it's balancing, you know, the rights and autonomy of the individual to make their own choices, because as anybody who's capable, we all have the right to make our own choices, good or bad. But when we're concerned about capacity issues, there's a fine balance there around protecting the financial interests of somebody and being taken advantage of by someone else, or they're making a really bad decision because of their incapacity. So there is no easy answer for this, but it's important to have conversations, pay attention to undue influence that might be occurring. Is there any manipulation that might be going on with an individual, or that's causing that confusion? So even family members creating that chaos of, you know, you should do this and you should make me power of attorney, and you want to put me as joint beneficiary, all those decisions can cause someone to really have a lot of anxiety and not think clearly. So it may not even be a medical condition, it could be just that anxiety that's causing that trauma. The person can't figure out what is the best option to do. So this is a quick little video that I wanted to show on financial abuse, just an individual who's living in a care home. So we'll just watch it quickly.
Hello, Professor.
Beth, my brightest protege. Are we having lunch, or is this a prison break?
Oh, this isn't so bad.
For an old folks home, you mean? Yeah, well, ever since I signed my power of attorney over to my son, he moved his family into my house and trundled me off to this warren for the aged. I don't understand.
Is there something the matter?
It's my property taxes. They're like 2 years in arrears.
Shouldn't your son have taken care of this?
Yes, that's what I was led to believe, but oh well. Shall we?
Well, we have a reservation down the street.
Yeah.
For one. There you go. How's your son?
Well, I don't know really, because between the sailboat and the cottage and the ski trips and the Caribbean getaways, his need for me has been eclipsed.
You can see from that, you can see from that video that, the son has moved into the house. He's moved him into a care home or retirement home, or doesn't look like it's a long-term care home, so maybe it's a retirement home, but he's not getting the financial, his taxes aren't being paid. The son is obviously using his money to go on extravagant trips and his wealth. So again, there's those dynamics of these things that we see changing within that environment. And if he has this wealth as an advisor, does he have access as a power of attorney to manage his funds? And if so, is he coming to, in a situation where the son hypothetically could be coming and saying, dad needs $30,000-$40,000 for to pay for the rent in the home, or we want to go on trips when you think actually he's going on the trips with him and they may not be. Or so there's a lot of red flags that come up. That video is actually part of the Neighbors, Friends, and Families initiative that we do in the community to educate older adults around just sort of those signs that things aren't right. And it doesn't seem too concerned, but his friend there is picking up on some of those red flags that might be coming to attention to her, thinking, maybe there's more going on here than what we see. So we see this, a lot of child or caregiver convincing the client or the parent that they require help managing their finances. And they ask to be named on joint account holders. Or to act as the beneficiary. The joint bank holder is very common. A lot of people are very trusted that yes, it'll make payment easier for any transactions that we have to make. That gives you the authority to act on my behalf if I want to go down south. But the unfortunate part is that we do see a lot of financial abuse happening when the person relies on that individual to pay their bills, and then they go to the bank to withdraw money, and their bank account has been cleared out. So that is a huge huge problem that we do see. People may not know what the risks are of doing that. Convincing the person to sell their house or moving into the house, as we've just seen in that video, where the person puts more funds at that person's disposal who may be taking advantage of them, including like the son or the caregiver or whoever's in that position of power. They're also, the person convinces the attorney, they abuse that position, that they think the money can be used for their own purposes, that they don't feel the need to take financial responsibility to manage the funds appropriately, that they're going on these trips like we've seen in the video, and using their funds for their own purposes, not for the intention of the needs of their older parent or the person that they're in charge to manage their funds for. So again, denying access or control, or even seeing statements. I've had seniors call and say, no one's allowing me to see my statement from my financial advisor. I don't even know how much money I have, because the person is controlling all the information, documentation that goes to them. They don't know how much money, they never see the bank statements. Those kind of things happen on a regular basis. So if this person has moved in, they said, I'll take care of it all. These are the problems that arise. One of the issues that we see around living status is the power of attorney or the family person that's looking after them refuses the individual to consider moving into a retirement home. So there's often this exchange of care. You live with me, or I'll move in with you. I'll take care of you. In the end, you can gift me your home as a result of me providing care or moving in with you, or just having access to their financial wealth while they're in that living situation. So that is a concern that might come to your attention. And it's often not discovered until later, after the finances are depleted, by other family members, that they understand, why am I getting a call from the bank, or that the mortgage payment or something, another family member or a neighbor has seen changes happening, that they may not have that close contact all the time, just assuming everything is fine until it's sort of that crisis moment. So some red flags that you might, other red flags you might consider: person's being nervous, as we mentioned. The client doesn't remember having certain transactions, or they seem confused. There's contradictory explanations for transactions about why they did this. You know, if you ask them, is this really what you want to do? You know, making this trade that might not be in their best interest that you're concerned about, their explanation changes each time you may ask them. Maybe there's undue influence or pressure from someone else to do that. And in powers of attorney, if dealing with a person who is a power of attorney for a client, it's really important for them to know what their role and responsibilities are. Often we come across the attorneys who really don't know what their role is, and they don't know that they're supposed to keep financial accounts. They feel that they can change beneficiaries, add themselves to the account, grant someone else new to be a power of attorney. They make a will for the older person or the client. They cannot do any of those things under legislation. So the thing with the power of attorney is that it really does give the individual that's the attorney a lot of power about basically controlling anything that they look after. So any of their money, investments, real estate, banking, they are to act in the best interest of the older person and keeping records and transactions on the grantor's behalf. So at any point, you know, people can ask for a passing of accounts. So saying, I'm concerned, you know, be accountable for what you've been doing or how you've been managing mom or dad's money. And if there is suspicion, if it comes to light, if it's gone to police and there's been investigation, there is a theft of power of attorney charge under the Criminal Code of Canada that people can be charged for the misuse of a power of attorney, or theft of power of attorney as it's referred to in the Criminal Code. So just highlighting a lot, again, if you're coming across more than one person claiming to be a legal authority, I think we come across those situations where an individual says, well, I'm the power of attorney, or no, I am, or they present you with a new document saying that they're a power of attorney. There is a lot of family dynamics that go into discrepancies around managing individuals' money, especially when capacity is questionable. Be really aware of some of those conflicts. We also see with older adults who may remarry, and then you have blended families. Sometimes the other family members may not agree with financial decision makings that are happening. So we get a lot of that conflict between families that do arise as well. The important thing is also to speak with the client, find out with that individual what is actually going on if they're able to give that information. Sometimes the power of attorney will refuse you to speak to the client. That's a big red flag. They don't allow you to have those conversations with the individual. It's important to talk about when you're with your client, and particularly maybe even in the first meeting, to start asking questions about if the person has power of attorney. Have they thought ahead about what ifs? Most people don't feel comfortable having these conversations, but as an advisor, I would encourage you to sort of overcome some of those fears or anxiety about, you're not offending someone, about asking, you know, have you thought about what may happen in the future? I think now, and we see so much, a lot of the clients may have an understanding of capacity and things that may change around health because they may have family members, have friends. We see it in the media. People are talking about just aging issues in general. So engaging in these difficult conversations may not be as difficult as we might think. And it's important because we know family dynamics are complicated. Finances can cause issues around emotional issues because of family. They don't want to offend somebody, you know, choosing one person over another. It's having these conversations can help alleviate some of those future problems that may arise. So having, you know, thinking about what might happen in the future. What if you become sick? What about downsizing? Have you thought about what you wanted, where you want to live in the future? Do you want to travel? What if your mobility changes? What if you live in a rural community and you're not able to drive? Then is that going to affect your changes of working with you as an advisor to plan what their long-term financial goals will be, or how to plan for those unmet needs that may arise in individuals' lives? So, you know, recognizing or giving them information about the potential for abuse or misuse is important as we go through those conversations with the client. The other thing is around that can help you is around the documentation of the Know Your Client. So we know that you've been encouraged to you know, keep documentation about Know Your Client files. And it's important that not just sort of be done once. And I know that there's an annual Know Your Client records to upkeep, but you know, things may change as people age. And you know your documentation, know your client. Where's the person living? Has that changed in the past year or past 6 months? You know, at what age, you know, in terms of that documentation, things change as person reaches 70, around, you know, changing RSPs to RIFs. Are like, how are we planning ahead for some of those changes? And you know, someone's higher net worth or less net worth still need to plan around these living expenses and care needs and those financial resources that they may need in the future. You have to individualize that as people go through the aging with your client, and knowing who that trusted person is for the knowing who the trusted contact person is, having that on file. And that is sometimes a little bit tricky in terms of what if the person doesn't have any close family members or persons that they can have. So maybe asking, you know, sort of flushing that out with the person. Also explaining what the role of that trusted contact person is. So you understand, or the person understands what you, if you were to contact them, what you have in terms of communication, and what you would sort of have that expectation of what may arise in those conversations. Keeping a copy of the current power of attorney on file. And what does that say within your own policies and procedures? Is that a notarized copy that you want to have on file to make sure it is legitimate? One of the things that we find with this power of attorney flipping back and forth with family members who may have a power of attorney done you know, yesterday, 6 months down the road, they come to you, and over that time period, they've changed the power of attorney to another person, but you don't have that current one on file. So it's, sometimes that's hard because we don't have you know, people can change those without having to actually give a copy. So asking for the last, most recent copy is really important to keep on hand as well. And increasing frequency of contact, whether that's in person or on phone. I think, you know, having those meetings in person, you get a better idea of what the person's what the person's situation is, where they might be living, is there other people living with them. You get that firsthand knowledge about what the client's environment is, where if things have sort of changed, or, you know, with their dynamics. And sometimes people will tell you things on the phone which may not be actually what's actually going on. There may be, on the phone, there may be someone actually telling them what to say, overhearing their conversations, manipulating them some way. Document your discussions, again, keeping notes, and even having the documentation of things that are changing and what the person's plans are as you go through that financial planning with the individual. So documenting is really important as we go through, if things come to your attention about what options you've talked to that person about. So getting back to their understanding and appreciating. So giving your documentation, well, I explained this is the choice that they choose to trade this investment or invest in something that's very high risk, and even though they understand it, you know, these potential circumstances. Again, the communication using plain language, large fonts, paying attention to how fast we're speaking, language, noise, just that office setting really is important. Again, just getting back to internal checks and balances. Again, checking the validity of those powers of attorney, as I mentioned, is really important. The trusted contact person. And then I know there is talk around the proposed safe harbor rule, which would help you as advisors protect the interests of yourself as well as for the client when these kind of situations arise. So that is that is being discussed, and hopefully that will, when things are, you know, when it's a clear legislated process, that then will give you, it is a tricky situation, because sometimes when we know there might be something happening, is there, if you choose to follow through or not to follow through, there's pros and cons on each end of that decision. So talking to your compliance, talking to legal representatives within your firm can really help you when you come across some of these situations that you're not sure who to take direction from, and when you're unsure about someone's capacity, how to proceed in those certain situations. So just quickly going through, I'm not going to go through each one of these. I think it's important, just as guiding principles, really to talk to the older adult, for you to get your own understanding of what their ability is to understand and appreciate situations and the decisions that they're making, and also be respectful for what their personal goals are and lifestyle and their choices of how they want to live and the decisions that they're making, right or wrong. Again, paying attention to the ability to make those choices, and getting consent. I think that's really key, is making sure that get consent, so we're not breaking privacy rules or going above what that person actually wanted, and respecting their privacy. I think we've kind of talked a little bit around interview strategies, but again, understanding what their prior wishes were. So if a POA is coming in and say, we want to take a significant amount of money out, and the person's in care, why would they need those financial resources at this period of time, when they don't particularly require that maybe at this point in time. So, you really have to do that judgment of paying attention to what their wishes were, and if there's any sort of history, or there's any denial or obvious mismanagement of their funds going on, paying attention to those issues, and then that interdependent relationships. And ask questions. I think some people are afraid to ask questions of individuals. Ask the person if they've ever been pressured into changing power of attorney. If they present with a new one that you've had one on file, and is this something that they wanted to do? Did they seek legal advice to do a power of attorney? If there's any changes in the living situation, anybody helping them manage their finances, maybe they don't have a power of attorney, but they're relying on their son. Maybe they don't have that power of attorney, but someone is still helping them. So having those conversations, and about their having someone else to talk to if they feel that you may not be available at that time. Is there other people that they have those conversations with? Just getting a lay of the land of where that's at for the individuals. So again, reporting concerns that you might have. I just talked about sort of the proposed safe harbor rule. Look at your legislations around powers of attorney within your provincial jurisdiction or territorial jurisdiction in Canada. The laws are different within each province and territory. So we don't have time to go through all of those, but they are a bit different for each one. So you as in British Columbia, the validity that wouldn't be valid if they now move to Ontario, so we have to, because if they become a resident here, they'd have to draft a new one. So there's, it has to move with that individual. Office of the Public Charity and Trustee, many jurisdictions have an office that if there's a situation where the person is at risk and there is incapacity, their office actually does investigations for the most part on trying to safeguard the financial well-being and or care for that individual. Police are also an option. Many police across, I know particularly in Ontario and other jurisdictions, there are dedicated officers that just deal with seniors' issues. So get to know who your police partners are within your jurisdictions that can assist you. And in some cases, it can be a conversation, just saying, without giving names, to say, here's the circumstances, is there anything that could be done about this? Again, going back to the regulatory guidance with IROC, you know, paying attention to the guidelines and policies within that. I think there are criminal offenses around financial abuse, not only with theft of power of attorney, but forgery, fraud, that people can be charged for. And I'm just going to skip the case study only because of time. The advice that we may give to clients is, you know, these seem very practical things that we take for granted because we know them on a daily basis, but sometimes people they do them without thinking. So giving PIN numbers or bank cards. So informing clients not to do that, not lending, not encouraging them to use direct deposits for all their investment disbursements. So instead of getting a check sent to the house, is there a way to automatically put that into the bank? Because if a check comes, there may be more vulnerability to someone say, hey, I didn't know, you know, this amount of money was coming in, you know, what are you going to use that money for? Not being guilt tripped into doing something they disagree with. Again, don't sign documents that they're not aware of or has been fully explained to them. And be careful co-signing loans or ownership of homes. So someone in their late 80s or 90s co-signing for a home for a friend or a family member, is that in their best interest at this point in time for that individual based on their financial objectives? Again, for clients, telling them to go to the websites, and even for regulators, this is a great site because it actually goes through the different actions and strategies that the different provinces are taking to protect the older adult residents within their own provinces and territories. And there has been some significant work being done across Canada. So in terms of contacts and supports, the Canadian Securities Administrators, which you're very familiar with, I'm sure, the Investment Industry Regulatory Organization, MFDA, the Ombudsman for Banking Services and Investments. Again, it could be used as a, to have people talk with them. We know clients actually go to that association if they have complaints as well. Your police partners, again, we are seeing an increase of romance scams where clients are coming to you for taking out large sums of money. If there's romance scams, you know, the Canadian Anti-Fraud Center is a place where not only clients and family members can report those to, because they try to track down those frauds and scams across Canada and across national borders. We also encourage people to call Senior Crime Stoppers as an option if they suspect something is going on. So again, I mentioned the Public Guardian Trustee. Another great resource who I know is representative is going to be speaking further in a webinar is the Canadian Centre for Elder Law. They have great resources and information on all different issues of seniors. There's options for end families to go into civil court as well. The one thing to pay attention to if you're giving for your senior clients is if they have concerns, not only with just knowing what legal options might be available, they're not lawyers, but they can give information about local services, is senior safety lines. They may be called something different within your province or territory, but they many provinces have safety lines in the territories for seniors to call just to get advice and information. So find out those in your jurisdictions who that contact would be. And again, these are just resources. I know online that CSI, we're going to be putting up some resources that you can access, many of them from some of these organizations as well as ourselves, that you can refer to later for more information and contacts around your jurisdictions. You'll find that a lot of those resources are very general in terms of referrals as well for provinces and territories because they're federal documents. They don't go into specifics, so give you sort of a website that you can then find your own province and territory with specific contact information and resources for your province and territory.
Great. Thank you, Rianne. That was a great presentation. I just have a question that's come up from one of the participants. What if I suspect elder abuse, executor POA setup, and then the client dies? What can client beneficiaries do to have restitution or challenge some items set out in a new will cetera, et cetera. So you've got a situation there. How would,
For a new will?
well,
Or for a,
the way I understand it is that you've suspected elder abuse and from the executor of the POA, and then the
okay.
client dies, and now
Okay,
you're left with the family. So what does the family have as recourse?
Okay, so the one thing we often gets confused is wills and executors. So executor of a POA, they're usually called an attorney for a POA or a grantor. The grantor is the actual senior, so the attorney is the person. So the executor is when the person passes away. If the person's passed away and they find that something happened after, usually that happens as an executor, they're kind of going through their financial records, and I've had those calls, and they're like, my brother has stolen like $50,000 from my parent. I had no idea. That would be something that they would have to then go to the lawyer, police, if they had enough information that they would then take more of a legal action in regards to if they were a POA and they didn't act in their best interest, they were misusing that funds, they'd have to go through that legal process of having enough evidence to do that theft of power of attorney charge. They have to go back and prove that, working with the fraud department within the police force, and then with their legal representative to gather that information.
Okay. Does the trusted contact person have to be a family member? And how do we verify the legitimacy of the trusted contact person provided?
My understanding, the trusted contact person doesn't have to be a family, doesn't have to be. It's who that person perceives as that trusted family, because sometimes the person may not have a family person, right? They may not have any kids in their family. We're seeing that a lot now that families, kids have passed away prior to the older adult, they never had children. We have those situations. So it would be up to that individual, I'm assuming, that would be able to designate who that trusted contact person would be.
Okay, so it can be a family member, it can be a friend, it's someone who the client chooses in the end.
I believe so.
Okay, perfect. In your presentation, you mentioned substance abuse. What about problem gambling in this attendee's experience? It's very common and poorly understood by the general public.
Yes, I agree. And we see that often that I just had a case recently where the person had the gambling problem. Is the family member moves in, they say that they want money to help pay for go to schooling or whatever the excuse is to the older person, and they give them the financial resources to support whatever it's a lie, but they're actually going to the casino and gambling, and once that money's gone, it's irreplaceable.
Okay. How do we handle it when there's two people named in the POA who don't get along and who are giving us conflicting instructions?
Yeah, that's very common as well. There's no easy answer. Sometimes I've said, and I'm not a lawyer, so those who are joining with us. So it's important. If there's discrepancy in terms of, and I guess it would assume if the person is incapable, right? If they're acting and they're not getting along. Sometimes people will go back to a lawyer, get some legal advice about what to do. We've had some cases where people will go to an elder mediator, and they're more elder mediators that are being trained around this to sort of sit down with a family, sit down with both parties and say, what's in the best interest of a mom or dad or whoever the person that they are being the attorney for. But we do see that often, and sometimes there's conflicting. Maybe they've never ever got along, and now they find them in this situation where they have to act jointly. And I always say, have to go back to what is the best interest for the older client. And I've had those situations. It's like, where's mom or dad at here? Like whose best interests are we applying for? Is it mine in the long run? Are you just looking after yourself? And you have to work together. That's why they put you in that position to make those choices for them. So sometimes you can't change a POA. There is the option that people can say, I don't want to be a power of attorney anymore. So they can say, you can do it. I now withdraw being a power of attorney as well. If they want to give up that control. A lot of it's that control between the two people of who thinks that they're making the better decision. It's a very difficult situation that does arise. There's no easy answers for those kind of situations.
Okay, and as someone is pointing out here among our attendees, there is the compliance department that the person can also ask about in situations like this.
Yeah, and I mentioned that in my presentation, or even your legal department, because it's really difficult too when it's jointly or severally. So they don't have to work together. So you're getting instructions from one sister and you've acted on it, and the other sister comes back the next week and says, well, what did you do that for? Then that's back and forth, and they're not doing things together, and they don't have to because they can act jointly or severally. Again, you can go to your compliance, as you mentioned, or your legal department to get better guidance on the direction to take for those situations.
Okay. What can I do if a client has been forced by the son to give a copy of her will, if POAs are spending clients' monies and then, and when told they cannot, they move the account to a discounter? If a romantic caregiver manages to get a client to change a will in her favor. So there's lots of manipulation going on there.
Yeah, and a lot of it is paying. So is there an opportunity to sort of talk with the client alone, finding out what do they want to do? Are they, that undue influence happens. So and if they come to your firm and they're having that meeting, having that one-to-one discussion is important to find out without someone else around, without someone influencing, because if you have someone sitting beside them, they're going to be waiting to sort of let that other person answer for them, or afraid to even speak openly because they're not sure what can happen after they leave your office and have those conversations. The romance scams, as I indicated before, are huge, but if they're convincing them to change their will or change the power of attorney, it's education, letting them know what the risks are. Do they understand, again, getting back to the understand, appreciate the consequences of saying, have you had these conversations with your other family? Do they, they don't have to, but to confine anybody, can do what they want. As adults, we can all make choices, but if someone's new that just sort of arrived into their lives, a lot of times that new person will try to ostracize and isolate them from their family. And sometimes family they part ways because they don't agree. They've had arguments and problems, so they don't have that conversation anymore. Still having the situation where you can talk with the older adult saying, have you talked to your children? You had why are you making these changes? Sort of maybe having them think through their choices and what the pros and cons of making those decisions are. Ultimately, if the person is competent, they can make those choices that we feel may not be in their best interest. So giving that education is really important.
And maybe one last question. Does a trusted contact person act in the same way as a POA?
That I don't know the answer to. The POA would have a legal authority to act in terms of managing finances, that you've actually given them that authority to, manage your property legally. And the trusted contact person, because I'm not in the financial industry specifically, I don't know the actual decision-making power they have. So I don't want to answer that without prior knowledge around that.
Okay. Well, certainly the trusted contact person can be someone that you can refer to if there's, say, a conflict between two sisters, or a change in the person's attitude or decisions that all of a sudden you think, is there something going on here? And you can ask the trusted person if they know if something's going on. So it's kind of a second, as I understand it, a second person. There's a question about safe harbor. Okay. There's a question about proposed safe harbor we don't have time to go into because we're at our time, but we'll make sure that we have something on the website about the proposed safe harbor rule so that you get that. So Rianne, thank you very much for doing this webinar. Clearly, there's a lot of interest. I still have a few questions, and if we will put some up on the site if we need to, if we've got questions we haven't answered. So thank you very much, and thank you for everyone who's participated. It's encouraging to see the number of people that are joining us for these webinars. So thank you very much.
Thank you.